40 Days of Purification, First Sunday of Lent, Year C. We're beginning Lent when for 40 days we intensify our prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. The reading the Church chose today is also on a similar 40-day period, the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert, where he intensified his prayers and fasting. Does the number 40 have special significance in the Bible? As Brant Petrie explains, it does, for the number 40 is often used in the Old Testament and New Testament to signify a time of purification. For example, during the time of Noah, when sin had dramatically increased throughout the world, God commanded rain to fall on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. This rain purified, washed away the many sinful acts that were being committed. Only Noah, his family, and animals survived this flood. Similarly, in the book of Exodus, after the Israelites rebel in the desert against God, who had freed them from Egyptian oppression, the Israelites are commanded by God to wander in the desert for 40 years until the rebellious generation is purified by dying and by being replaced by a newer generation, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. These are only two biblical examples of the use of the number 40 to signify a period of purification. All these times of purification, though, were imperfect. They did not perfectly purify those undergoing purification. Instead, they prepared the way. They foreshadowed, they anticipated the perfect purification of Jesus, who, as God in the flesh alone, because only God is perfect, can perfectly purify. In the desert, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, underwent perfect purification, not because he needed any purification, but rather to perfect the many imperfect kinds of purification people have experienced throughout history. The Gospel passage for today presents this perfect purification by describing Jesus facing the very same temptations that the first Adam faced. And Jesus faces this as the new Adam. Genesis describes Adam and Eve facing three temptations, and each time they fall into sin. The three temptations, as represented by the forbidden fruit hanging on. The three temptations are represented by the forbidden fruit hanging on the tree of good and evil that grew in the middle of the Garden of Eden, along with the tree of life that Adam and Eve were permitted to eat from. This forbidden fruit looked, and Genesis says, good for food, was a delight to the eyes, and was desired to make one wise. As Brant Petrie points out, these three temptations, as described in the New Testament, in the first letter of John, are equivalent to lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. The forbidden fruit tempting Adam and Eve by looking good as food corresponds to lust of the flesh, or desiring for excessive bodily pleasure. The forbidden fruit tempting Adam and Eve by delighting their eyes corresponds to the lust of the eyes, or greed, where I disorderly desire all that I see, even if this means violently taking it from someone else for myself. Finally, the forbidden fruit tempting Adam and Eve with the promise that if they eat the forbidden fruit, they will be honored for their wisdom, and without having to humbly acknowledge God as the source of all wisdom. They can take that wisdom on their own terms. Jesus, facing these three root causes of all sin, by, unlike Adam and Eve, remaining perfectly ordered in how he desires the goods of this world, including the pleasure, and Jesus remained humbly obedient to his heavenly Father's will, who desired Jesus to be King of the universe, but in a particular way, by the way of suffering, by the way of cross, by the way of faithful love, no matter how much Jesus suffers. In contrast, the devil, when tempting Jesus, promised to give Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, as Petrie explains, by telling Jesus that instead of being king of all by way of suffering, by way of cross, by humble suffering love, the devil promised Jesus that I'll give you all the kings in the world and you don't have to suffer. You don't have to go by the way of the cross. Instead, all you have to do is bow down and worship me. Jesus, of course, rejects this temptation, along with rejecting the temptation of turning bread into stones and the temptation to pride, to vainglory. The temptation to pride consisted of the devil tempting Jesus to publicly display his power in leaping majestically from a tower of the temple and landing without harm to the praise of a crowd of people. During this season of Lent, may we rely more on Jesus, who alone as God can perfectly purify us. In so doing, may we intensify our prayers, by which we in humility obediently listen to God. May we also intensify our fasting, by which we moderate our desire for pleasure. Finally, may we practice almsgiving, by which we moderate our desire for excessively possessing created goods. For after all, we are born into this world naked, and we will return to God as naked as the day we were born. If we are free from excessive attachment to the goods of this world, we will, by the grace of God, die in peace. We will die in the peace of Christ. We will die a holy death, and not die resentfully for having goods we want to cling on to excessively to be removed from our grasp. God bless.